This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. We all know the old saying about teaching a man to fish, and as parents, we want our kids to learn the things that will set them up for success. So this holiday season, give kids money skills that last well beyond 2024 with Greenlight. Greenlight is a debit card and money app made for families, where kids learn how to save, invest, and spend wisely with parental controls built in. Sign up today at greenlight.com/Spotify. Greenlight.com/Spotify.
Feel your max with Brooks Running and the all-new Ghost Max 2. They're the shoes you deserve, designed to streamline your stride and help protect your body. Treat yourself to feel-good landings on an ultra-high stack of super comfy nitrogen-infused cushion that takes the edge off every step, every day. The Brooks Ghost Max 2. You know, technically, they're a form of self-care. Brooks, let's run there. Head to brooksrunning.com to learn more.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now, you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Every so often, I come across a story that scares the hell out of me. And it's not because of the supernatural or paranormal elements. The case we're about to explore is horrifying, and even though it includes an alleged demonic possession, religious hysteria, and the exorcism of at least 40 demons, these elements are not what make this story scary. It's what Michael Taylor did after the exorcism that will terrify you. And truly, if there was ever a case to debate the veracity of demonic possession, this one is it. Because while some claim Michael Taylor was under demonic influence on October 5th and 6th, 1974, others believe he was suffering from a debilitating mental health crisis, one that led to inarguably the grisliest crime in West Yorkshire history. Though I'll offer one later in the episode, I'll also give a content warning now. This episode contains graphic descriptions of violence against animals, domestic violence, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the alleged demonic possession and failed exorcism of Michael Taylor, and the horrifying tragedy that took place soon after. Was Michael Taylor really possessed by 40 demons, as some claimed? Or was he suffering from a mental health crisis? I'll tell the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. By all accounts, 31-year-old Michael Taylor was a mild-mannered, quiet man who in 1974 was living in Ossett, West Yorkshire with his wife Christine, their 5 children, and their dog, a poodle. A butcher by trade, he worked hard to provide for his family. But at some point, he suffered a back injury which affected his ability to maintain a full-time job. While researching, I was unable to find the exact time when Michael hurt his back, though several resources stated it was from earlier in his life. As his injury worsened, and the longer he remained unemployed, Michael withdrew from his family and friends, and was described as depressed. A small market town, Ossett, quote, had a highly religious population, and most people regularly attending church, end quote. And though there were many churches and religious groups around them, the Taylors were not devout and mostly irreligious. As Michael's depression worsened, a friend, Barbara Wardman, introduced the family to the Christian Fellowship Group. She believed Michael's depression was a spiritual problem and, quote, could somehow be eased with a spiritual intervention, end quote. She pleaded with the Taylors to attend a weekly prayer meeting, and within a short time, they were convinced. The Christian Fellowship Group was led by a young pastor, 21-year-old Marie Robinson. Michael quickly became enamored with the group and attended prayer meeting along with other functions at the church. Though he'd not given much attention to church and spirituality in the past, within a short time, Michael became well acquainted with the teachings of the group and began speaking in tongues. According to Britannica, speaking in tongues is a form of the Greek word glossolalia, which means, quote, tongue-talking, end quote. A more expansive definition explains speaking in tongues as, quote, utterances approximating words in speech, usually produced during states of intense religious experience. Speakers and witnesses may interpret the phenomenon as possession by a supernatural entity, conversations with divine beings, or the channeling of a divine proclamation or inspiration, end quote. That last sentence is especially important because within some religious groups, speaking in tongues is a sign of God's manifest presence. Together with Marie Robinson, Michael would, quote, use the power of God to exorcise people of their sins and speak in tongues, end quote. Something interesting, Michael experienced selenophobia, an intense fear of the moon. Within a short time, Michael and Marie practiced private rituals where they would stay up through the night, making the sign of the cross at each other, quote, to ward off what they believed was the evil power of the full moon, end quote.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
The more time Michael spent in the church, the more enthralled he became with Marie Robinson. He spent less time at home and more time with her. And though he may have initially intended to grow spiritually, he soon fell in love with the young pastor. Christine Taylor grew increasingly suspicious of Michael's time away from home and believed an inappropriate relationship had formed between Michael and Marie. She observed a shift in his attitude when he was at home. Michael was withdrawn, sullen, irritable, and argumentative. The kind, gentle, soft-spoken man became angry and erratic. By then, Christine was convinced the church group, and more specifically Marie Robinson, was a negative influence on Michael. And one night, she decided to let everyone know. During a prayer meeting, Christine stood up in front of the congregation, including Michael and Marie, and accused the two of having a carnal relationship. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. Michael stood up, and instead of responding to his wife, ran up and physically and verbally attacked Marie. It would take several men to restrain Michael from further attacking her. For her part, Marie defended herself against the raging Michael, while most of the congregation stood there shocked. Something interesting. When recounting Michael's outburst, Marie stated, quote, "I suddenly glanced at Mike, and his whole features changed. He looked almost bestial. He kept looking at me, and there was a really wild look in his eyes. I started screaming at him out of fear. I started speaking in tongues. Mike also screamed at me in tongues. I was on the verge of death, and I seemed to have come to my senses. I knew that only the name of Jesus would save me, and I just started saying over and over again, 'Jesus.' When Christine heard me calling on the name of Jesus, she started saying it too. And I believe firmly that it was only by calling his name that I was not killed." End quote. Something else that's interesting. Michael admitted he, quote, "felt an evil influence cast a shadow over him," end quote, when Christine stood up. Marie explained to Christine that her relationship with Michael was not sexual. Somehow, she eased Christine's concerns enough to continue meeting with Michael. At the next prayer meeting, a contrite Michael apologized to Marie for his attack and claimed he could not remember what happened. The congregation forgave him, and he was restored to fellowship. However, Michael continued to behave erratically, and word of his outbursts traveled to Peter Vincent, the local vicar. Together with his wife Sally, the couple invited Michael and Christine over for dinner, in large part to assess Michael. What the Vincents experienced was alarming. One article stated, quote, "This couple, Peter and Sally Vincent, invited the Taylors to their home to assess Michael's condition. After Michael shattered some dinnerware and threw a cat out of the window, the Vincents immediately decided that Michael was in immediate need of an exorcism." End quote. Something interesting. Michael agreed with the vicar that he was possessed by a demon. Just before midnight on October 5th, 1974, Michael and Christine arrived at St. Thomas's Church. Also present were Peter Vincent, Reverend Raymond Smith, and other members of the prayer group. For the next 8 hours, Father Vincent and Reverend Smith performed the rite of exorcism on Michael Taylor. According to eyewitnesses to the ritual, Michael, quote, began thrashing, spitting, and convulsing, end quote, which led to several prayer group members to tie him to the church floor. While restrained, Michael was essentially waterboarded with holy water and had, quote, a crucifix jammed down his throat, end quote. One article stated, quote, over the course of the night, the exorcists burned Michael's own crucifix, shoved wooden crosses into his mouth, and continually doused him with water, end quote. Throughout the hours-long exorcism, Michael growled and snapped at anyone who came close, which to some was evidence he was demonically possessed. In fact, Father Vincent and Reverend Smith were convinced Michael was possessed by at least 40 demons, quote, representing such traits as incest, bestiality, blasphemy, lewdness, heresy, masochism, and carnal knowledge, end quote. They were equally convinced each demon needed to be exorcised individually, which after nearly 8 hours left the men exhausted and unable to continue. On the morning of October 6, 1974, Father Vincent and Reverend Smith decided to stop the exorcism and pick up at another time. They determined they'd exorcised all but 3 demons, whose names were insanity, anger, and murder. The two opted to send Michael home in the care of his wife Christine. Something interesting. When the delay was announced, most of the congregation agreed and started to head to their homes. However, a minister's wife, Margaret Smith, claimed, quote, that she had received a warning in her mind from what she believed to be God, saying that the demon of murder was going to escape from Michael and kill Christine, end quote. Despite pleading with the 2 men, Father Vincent and Reverend Smith waved away her concerns and instructed Michael and Christine to go home and rest prior to the next exorcism, which was to be performed the following day. Sometime just before 8 a.m., the couple left St. Thomas's Church and headed to their home. Let's pause for a moment and consider a few things. Father Vincent and Reverend Smith were convinced Michael Taylor was possessed by several dozen demons, and Michael agreed, though to what extent we don't know. The 2 men successfully exorcised all but 3 demons, leaving behind insanity, anger, and murder. The plan was to rest up and come back the next day to cast out the final 3, despite the stark warning that failing to exorcise them now would result in Christine's murder by Michael. This is stunning, if only because it wasn't a general warning of bad or violent behavior. It was a specific and detailed premonition and threat, which the 2 men waved away unconcerned. Their decision would have tragic consequences and alter the lives of everyone forever. Though I gave a content warning at the start of the episode, I'll give one here as well. The following contains graphic descriptions of violence against animals, domestic violence, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Sometime around 9:45 a.m., less than 2 hours after the exorcism concluded, a police officer, Ian Walker, was patrolling through the streets of Ossett when he came upon a disturbing sight. A man, stumbling in the middle of the street. He was naked and covered in blood from head to toe. When Officer Walker approached the man, he laid down on the street, curled up into the fetal position, and began screaming over and over, "It is the blood of Satan." As a small crowd gathered around, someone recognized the man. It was Michael Taylor. Officers assumed Michael had either been attacked or hurt himself, and quickly called an ambulance. While waiting for the ambulance to arrive, Michael was inconsolable and continued to scream over and over. Within a few minutes, the ambulance came and took Michael to a local hospital, and officers were given his name and address, which they promptly drove to. When they arrived at Michael's home, the officers were surprised to find other officers were already there. As Officer Walker approached the home, he was shocked to find the inspector standing just outside the front door, hunched over and vomiting. He told Officer Walker, quote, "You don't want to see this one, son. I've seen nothing like it before, and I've seen a few. It's the wife. She's got no... He's ripped at her, son. It's a right mess in there. There's not much of her left. You don't want to see it, eh?" Despite the warning, Officer Walker stepped into the Taylor's home and was shocked by what he saw. The interior of the front room was in disarray, quote, "with signs of destruction apparent even from a cursory look," end quote. There was blood everywhere. It covered every surface of the room. But not just blood. There were bits of flesh, pulp, and brain matter covering the walls, floors, and surfaces in the room. And on the living room floor lay the bodies of Christine Taylor and their pet poodle. The two were unrecognizable. What had been unclear just a few minutes before came into sharp focus. The blood covering Michael Taylor was not his own. It was Christine's and the family dog. A few minutes before Michael was discovered by Officer Walker, he'd brutally attacked and killed his wife, quote, "removing her eyes and tongue, before ripping her face off her skull. He then strangled the family dog. After the dog was dead, he ripped out its eyes and tore it limb from limb, throwing them around the house," end quote. Officers immediately searched for a murder weapon, but despite their best efforts, were unable to locate one. Sometime later, the medical examiner determined the injuries were not caused by a weapon, but rather were caused by Michael. He used his bare hands to attack and murder Christine and the dog. For many of the responding officers, it was the most gruesome and brutal crime scene they'd ever witnessed. Officers took Michael into custody while at the hospital and interviewed him within a few hours of the murder. When asked what happened, Michael stated, quote, "It was a long night. They danced around me and burned my cross because that was tainted with the evil. They had me in the church all night. Look at my hands. I was banging on the floor. The power was in me. I couldn't get rid of it, and neither could they. They were too late. I was compelled by a force within me to destroy everything living within the house," end quote. He also added, quote, "They primed me for it last night. They tried to bring me peace of mind, but instead they filled me with the devil. It was within her," end quote. Despite his admission of guilt, Michael was unable to remember the actual murder. He did not appear to have a motive for the crime, other than attempting to expel what he believed was an evil force within Christine, stating, quote, "Released. I am released. It is done. The evil in her has been destroyed." End quote. Michael was eventually charged with Christine's murder, with his defense team claiming insanity. Though Michael claimed to be possessed by a demon, his lawyers did not use this in his defense, instead believing Michael was mentally and emotionally fragile, stating, quote, "Neurotics feeding neurosis to a neurotic." End quote. Despite the overwhelming evidence and Michael's confession to the murder, he was acquitted by reason of insanity. Instead, he spent 2 years in Broadmoor Hospital and another 2 years at Bradford Royal Infirmary before being released. Since 1978, Michael Taylor has lived in Ossett, and in 2005, he was arrested for the, quote, "indecent assault of a teenage girl," end quote. There are some who believe Michael Taylor was in fact possessed by demons prior to committing the horrific murder of Christine. They point to the dramatic shift in his personality and his increasingly erratic behaviors. For them, Michael's transformation from mild-mannered and quiet to angry and aggressive is proof that something deeply spiritual was happening. Others, though, remain unconvinced of demonic possession. Instead, they believe Michael was suffering from a mental health crisis, a crisis that was exacerbated by the exorcism ritual. It is possible Michael was suffering from borderline personality disorder. It's important to note, I am not offering a mental health diagnosis. I am offering a possible alternative to demonic possession, especially since Michael's depression was already mentioned, and many believe he was experiencing a mental health crisis. According to the DSM-5, symptoms of borderline personality disorder include intense and rapidly shifting moods, extreme reactions to perceived abandonment or rejection, difficulty regulating emotions leading to intense anger, anxiety, or depression, idealization and devaluation of relationships alternating between intense closeness and conflict, difficulty maintaining stable relationships, impulsive behaviors, black and white thinking, or viewing people or situations as all good or all bad, and paranoid thoughts. While we may never know whether Michael Taylor was possessed or not, this case raises many questions about spiritual warfare, mental health, exorcisms, and accountability after committing a crime. There's something about this case that really bothers me. It feels like a miscarriage of justice that Michael Taylor spent 4 years under commitment, only to be released without conditions. The murder of Christine Taylor was brutal and horrific, and it shook the souls of experienced police officers. And yet, Michael Taylor only served 4 years. Not only did Christine Taylor lose her life, but the couple's 5 children were left to fend for themselves, almost overnight. The ripple effect of the murder reverberated throughout the Ossett community. It was a senseless tragedy that likely could have been prevented had Michael received the care he needed. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Was Michael Taylor really possessed by 40 demons as some claimed? Or was he suffering from a mental health crisis? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.